Welcome to the Thursday, September 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Indian River County Planning and Zoning Commission. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Any additions or deletions to the agenda?
No, sir.
No, none. First order of business will be approval of the August 25th, 2022 minutes.
Motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes pass. So tonight we have two public hearings on the agenda. The first is consideration of Britain Properties of Indian River County LLC's request for land development regulation amendments to sections 901.03, 911.10, and 971.13 to allow automobile parking and storage in the PRO, OCR, MED, CN, and CL zoning districts. Any declaration of ex parte communications? None, so we'll swear in all who want to speak on this. Should we do both of the public hearings at the same time?
You can, yeah. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, let's do both of them.
The whole
Do you swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Very good. Staff presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Ryan Sweeney, Chief of Current Development. Tonight we have Britain Property of Indian River County LLC's request for land development regulation amendments to allow automobile parking and storage in the PRO, OCR, MED, CN, and CL zoning districts. A little bit of background on how we got here. The applicant, Britain Property of Indian River County, by way of their representative, submitted an LDR amendment application to allow automobile parking and storage in the CL zoning district in order to allow parking of vehicles across the street from their office site. A few weeks or months later, a second interested party also requested to piggyback on that same request to allow automobile parking and storage in the OCR zoning district. And after receiving that second sort of inquiry, staff kind of looked at all of what we're calling the lower intensity commercial districts, which include those two as well as PRO, OCR, and MED, and decided that it would just be, for consistency purposes, it would be best to just make this change across the board to all of those 5 lower intensity commercial zoning districts as an administrative permit use. A brief slide about the LDR amendment process. So the LDR amendments are legislative in nature. Most of what we deal with on a meeting-to-meeting basis is quasi-judicial, but these are legislative. It requires a public hearing by the Planning and Zoning Commission that's being held tonight with a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. And then if a LDR amendment is proposing to actually change the list of uses, permitted, administrative, special exception, or add a type of use, that requires 2 public hearings by the Board of County Commissioners. The second LDR amendment that you're going to hear tonight is just changing the text of the code, so that's only requires 1 public hearing at the board level. So analysis of what is being proposed. The proposed ordinance will amend 3 different LDR sections. The first section is 901.03, which is just creating a definition for automobile parking and storage, and it basically defines automobile parking and storage as allowing automobiles, passenger vans, utility vans, and light-duty trucks. It does not allow or prohibits or doesn't include in the definition large commercial vehicles like dump trucks or bucket trucks, RVs, or boats. The second part of the ordinance, is section 91110, which is the commercial zoning district section. And this specifically designates automobile parking and storage as an administrative permit use, or an A, in the table for the PRO, OCR, MED, CN, and CL zoning districts. Right now, currently in the CG and CH, which are the more intense commercial uses, it's allowed as a permitted or a P use. So we're adding A's to the table. And then the third section is amending section 971.13 and creating a new subpart 6, which is automobile parking and storage in the same 5 zoning districts I've mentioned. It, again, at the administrative permit use level, it requires P&Z level, so it's not a staff level approval. It does require planning and zoning commission approval. And it identifies 7 specific land use criteria that need to be satisfied in order to recommend approval of this particular use, which you guys see administrative permit uses quite a bit. So staff coordinated with the original applicant and also passed it along to the piggyback interested party, and they reviewed and agreed as well. The 7 criteria, I'm going to summarize them, but they are a little bit more specific in the ordinance text. So but in summary, the first criterion requires that all parking and storage areas be paved on asphalt or concrete. So no unpaved, millings, shell, it has to be paved. And it must meet all of the dimensional criteria required for a commercial parking lot. Stall width, stall dimension, drive aisles, everything. It's basically a standard parking lot, like open, like you would see at a shopping center. Criterion number 2 prohibits, again, parking or storing of commercial vehicles, boats, or RVs. So again, this is just passenger vehicles, light duty trucks, and vans. Nothing large like a big, F-550 or a bucket truck or anything like that. Prohibits commercial or pay-to-park facilities, so not like what you would see in a downtown where you pay. It's not that type of use. It's just a normal parking lot. Number 4 requires a lighting plan and appropriate shielding so that light doesn't spill onto any adjacent residential zoning or zoning districts or local roads. It can spill onto thoroughfare plan roads because that would be normal for light to touch those roads. But oftentimes these lesser intense zoning districts do either directly abut or in proximity to multifamily or even single-family residential zoning districts. These are kind of, again, the lesser intense zoning district buffers between the more intense zoning districts. Number 5 requires a type C buffer and a 3-foot tall opaque feature between the parking area itself and any residentially designated properties. Number 4 requires all standard perimeter buffers apply to all other project perimeters. Sometimes you're going to have residentially designated property on, say, one side, a local road on another. Maybe you might have commercial on the third side, which is really pretty minimal. And so we kind of treat the different properties as they are or how they're used. Criterion 7 requires a remote or freestanding site that serves an adjacent site, whether it be immediately adjacent or across the street, to be connected via an existing or proposed sidewalk or pedestrian system. So in this case, it is across the street, but they're going to have local sidewalks along the road. And staff supports the requested LDR amendments based on the clear definition, the requirement for administrative permit use approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the 7 specific land use criteria that I've laid out. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the BCC adopt the proposed automobile parking and storage LDR amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, questions?
I'm just curious what the rationale is behind having to have the areas, the parking areas paved. I think about whenever I go to Hobart Soccer Complex, drop my kids off, we always park in a grass field, and I know the city of Vero Beach is putting a huge impetus on trying to tax for stormwater and not prevent impervious land, but that is something that I just think would contribute to additional stormwater runoff. Is there any reason that?
Yeah, so again, with something like a park or a church type use, infrequent, maybe once or twice a week, maybe Hobart probably use more than that, but this is stuff that's going to be driven on most likely daily, every day of the week. So much like the stormwater runoff, you also have tracking or mud or anything else. So again, what we're trying to avoid is what's a heavier commercial industrial type uses, an unpaved vehicle storage lot, millings, shell rock, things of that nature. So this is a formal parking lot like you would see at an office or a shopping center. With the other reason, just to indulge, is striping, ADA, all of those things, keep everything organized and circulation readily identifiable, so you can't really stripe millings or shell rock, anything of that nature.
I have a question, if you don't mind, Ryan. In the background information, it discusses the storage within OCR office commercial, and then it says residential district as an administrative permit, but I don't really see residential as far as the zoning.
That is the name of that specific district. OCR is called Office Commercial Residential. It's a hybrid district. There's not a whole lot of it out there. But this does not apply to like a residential, single-family or multifamily zoning district. It's that specific, that's the name of that specific district.
Do we have a definition of, you use the term light-duty trucks, and
So.
when I was with General Motors, there was light, medium, and heavy, and like a 350 was the top end of light, and
Sure. Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mutual. Yeah, basically F-350, 3,500 or 1 ton is sort of the top end of the light-duty truck. We do have a definition of what a commercial vehicle is. It's got a length and a height and a weight requirement. But that's when you get into the, like I said, the F-650s, the big dualies, or dump trucks, you know, things that are much bigger. But yeah, F-250, F-350 would be allowed.
thank you.
Any other questions? All right, this is a public hearing, so we'll open the public hearing for comment at either one of the podiums.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, commissioners. My name is Joseph Paladin. I'm the president of Black Swan Consulting Entitlement. I actually represent the Britain group on this parking area. And let me say this. This not only will be aesthetically pleasing when we get done, because I plan on upgrading my buffer to a B buffer basically, because it's going to be hard to have an opaque C buffer. I've been doing this for a long time. Anytime you do a C buffer, it's hard to have it opaque. So I'm going to upgrade my own project to a B buffer to make sure it's opaque so people can't see the fence or see what's inside. It'll be a very aesthetically pleasing entry. I worked with Rich from engineering on that, several months ago. And we plan on landscaping the entire perimeter of the lot, so when people drive in there or the neighbors drive in and out, you're going to see a landscaped lot. You're not going to see a bunch of trucks and a bunch of big vehicles. Like we said, it's going to be basically lightweight vehicles anyway. But I think that the B buffer will give you the effect you want so you can't see through it and see the fence or see anything like that. So I'm going to voluntarily say I'm going to commit to that. I think that this solves another problem. You have a lot of problems in the area with code violations. That's because they have nowhere to park. Every week there's code violations, because I go to code enforcement almost every month and I have a lot of clients there. If people have a place to park their vehicle where it's safe and it's secure, then that'll take away from a lot of those violations that code enforcement has to follow every month. Because there's not a month that goes by that code enforcement doesn't have several code violations on parking violations. I think this will solve that problem. So if we can solve that problem and make it aesthetically pleasing, so it's pleasing to the neighborhood and pleasing to the people driving in or out of there, I think that we're solving a problem the best way we know how to do it. And most of you all know me. I've done a lot of projects in this county, and I intend on making this one come out something that I can be proud of and that you all can be proud of being a part of. So this is a team effort. We're going to solve a problem. We're going to make it the highest quality possible. And because this might be like the first one of this type, I think we're going to set the standard in the bar at a level everybody else has to come up to it. Now, usually I make a whole lot of people come in after me, angry at me, but that's the way it is. But, I think if we set that bar up so the neighbors are happy with it, you're happy with it, the public's happy with it, and I can be proud of something we did, I think that's the way to start. So I'm willing to set that bar and be the guinea pig to set that at a higher bar and maybe make some people angry. I don't mind that. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be here and I'll answer any questions you have. And my engineer's here if we have any questions on engineering. Thank you. Any
Thank you.
questions?
Thank you, yep. Anyone else wish to speak? We'll close the public hearing. Any additional questions for staff?
I do have one question, if you don't mind. This is, at this point in time, for a specific company, let's say. What happens if, let's say, that company sells and it's another entity?
Well, yeah, I would clarify on that, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Landers. So this is an LDR amendment that applies countywide to all the zoning districts, just outlines the criteria. The specific project that the applicant is applying for will actually come back to you all as a site plan and administrative permit use. So we'll have a crack at making sure they meet the criteria through that review and approval process. But if they meet the criteria and all things being equal, they sell it, as long as they remain in compliance, it should function the same regardless.
I've got a question. Can trailers be parked?
I would say no, that would be, I mean, that would be part of a commercial aspect. It's really meant to be for vehicles, self-powered vehicles. I may, if you want to include it in the recommendation, Bill, I don't know, but I can tweak the ordinance to not include. I don't want to get carried away. I mean, if somebody has a small utility trailer that they pull with, and
Swimming pool contractors.
yeah, but I don't want to get into the big dump trailers either, so.
Right, and so boats on trailers?
No boats.
Yep.
Right, so I'd take a fine line approach with that. We could say no trailers over a certain length if you want to. I'm not overly concerned that it's going to get out of hand, but the other thing we could do is, sort of code enforce if we needed to.
If it's up to interpretation, maybe you should exclude
Exclude?
certain time a trailer.
You've got a 23-foot limitation as far as vehicles. That would include a trailer. 9 feet in height, 108 inches for your trailer. So I would think you're okay.
Yeah, and again, the definition specifically references back to the section that there's a commercial vehicle section that it's actually tied to what you're allowed or not allowed to park in residential zoning districts, Chip. That kind of goes back to what you were asking about. But the two are one and the same, so we would be able to apply that rule. I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. Bob, the public hearing is closed.
If you want to reopen or?
Hassel?
You can quickly reopen and take the comment and close it if there are no others after Mr. Bruce.
For Bob, yeah.
Hi, Bob Bruce. I live up in the North Beach area, and I represent Indian River Neighborhood Association. I think you should go ahead and change that C buffer to B buffer in this LDR amendment. I think that would be the best way to go, personally.
Okay. So I guess now we'll close the public hearing and call for a motion.
Yeah, go ahead. Unless there's any other discussion.
Motion to approve with staff recommendations.
Got a motion to approve?
I'll second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. All right, our second public hearing tonight is consideration of a request by Dr. David Cox to amend the Land Development Regulation Section 932.07, piers, docks, and boat slips by revising the size restrictions on the unwalled boat shelters to be consistent with Florida Department of Environmental Protection and other jurisdictional agency requirements. So we've all sworn in. Staff presentation, please.
For the record, Stephen Hitt, County Principal Environmental Planner. Sorry about the long title. It's a mouthful. We'll start with a little bit of background for this LDR amendment. Ryan already went through the process a little bit with the last one, but this particular issue is related to, we'll say unwalled shelters in the code, but from here on out we can call them boat shelters. It's pretty much one and the same. So between 1991, when the code was first amended to 2019, these facilities had a maximum square footage of 400 square feet. And they were not able to exceed Florida Department of Environmental Protection size limitations in aquatic preserves, which at the time and still currently is 2,000 square feet. We'll get into that a little bit later. But In 2019, we received an application by Mr. Garrett Goudreau's for an amendment to this code. He had received a permit from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and I believe the Army Corps as well, for a 976 square foot unwalled shelter, and was proceeding to go through the process with the county and ran into the size limitation. So the amendment requested at that time was to remove the 400 square foot limitation so that he could apply for a permit through the building department and obtain a permit for his proposed shelter. And also, again, at that time, he was seeking to make the current LDRs consistent with state and federal permitting requirements. And so that brings me to the state requirements as they are today, and at the time when the last amendment went through, Florida Statute Section 25842. I won't read the whole thing, but basically this applies to private single-family docks within aquatic preserves, and provided a provision that the shelter could not overhang more than 1 foot on top of the boat moored at a slip. There's also a Florida Administrative Code 62-330, which applies to, again, private single-family dock facilities and contributes a 2,000 square foot limitation over surface waters. And so we held a public hearing on May 9th, in which the PZC voted 4-1 to adopt the recommended LDR amendments, with the caveat and direction to staff to look for basically a way to kind of rein in potential maximum sizes to make something that was not obtrusive and unreasonably large, was the language they used. And again, the concern at that time was primarily with docks that are close to shore. We refer to them as marginal docks. And I'll show you some information later on to describe those a little bit further. So as I said, the LDRs were amended based on a revision that included a 1,000 square foot upper limitation, but it was tied to the size of the dock. And it was tied to the size of the dock in that it could not be more than 50% of the combined total surface area of the dock over surface water. And then we also added at that time the 1 foot overhang provision. So basically moving forward, that revised amendment was adopted by the BCC by a 3-2 vote in July of 2019. And effectively, that allowed us to regulate the unwalled boat shelters in excess of 400 square feet. It was, at that time, more consistent than the previous ordinance with jurisdictional requirements. And, staff at the time believed that would, prevent an abusive out-of-scale size limit for boat shelters. Since that time, we've come to realize that there are some issues that we'll discuss in a slide here, but basically it wasn't fully consistent with the state and federal requirements, and that has created some unintended consequences and some concerns, which is why we're bringing it forward again. So some of those unintended consequences that we're seeing is we're getting increased demand for more than one unwalled shelter. And so having the 400 or 1,000 square foot maximum presents an issue if you have more than one vessel and you'd like to cover both of them. It also incentivizes maximizing your dock, especially in open water areas like Ambersands Beach area or North County, where you have large stretches to the intercoastal waterway, and so those docks to get to deep water are extended way out. There is still that 2,000 square foot limitation that the state puts on, and so if you want to get anywhere close to that 1,000 square foot limit, you basically have to build a 1,000 square foot dock so that you could, or I should say you have to build a 2,000 square foot dock so that you can at least get a 1,000 square foot cover. And I already mentioned that there's the 2,000 square foot limit. But under the state's regulations, it's not tied to dock size. Like, they just have the 2,000 square foot cap, and that's it. So whether you can make that work with a shorter dock and a bigger unwalled shelter, or some combination thereof, that's the limitation. Getting back to the 1 foot overhang, that's kind of created an unintended consequence for smaller dock areas, marginal docks in particular, or those in canals where you don't have the length of shoreline or the ability to project out into the waterway as far, and you're limited to that 400 square foot limit, because we've added a 1 foot overhang that then reduced the actual footprint of what a boat or boat lift could be under that 400 square feet. This potentially causes a scenario where the size of vessel that a person may have wanted to put there is now unreasonable or smaller than maybe something they currently own. So it's actually added a regulation that wasn't there previously for those 400 square foot docks, boat shelters, sorry. So as we have rewritten the current amendment, the proposed amendment more or less removes the 400 and the 1,000 square foot language, and that in and of itself had some challenges with interpretation, both from staff and from those applying for these unwalled shelters, and essentially just leaves it up to the 1 foot overhang limit. They're still in LDR 93207, like a previous paragraph, which I'm not showing here, but it has the FDEP size limitations kind of tied in. It's not explicit that it's 2,000 square feet, but it provides a limitation there. So basically what I did want to highlight is, these things aren't reviewed in isolation, so there are plenty of other code requirements that we apply when looking at unwalled shelters that are not changing by the addition or deletion of some of the language in that current chapter or current section. You still cannot build an unwalled shelter over seagrass or other aquatic vegetation. That's been a long-standing criteria. You can bridge over them with walkways, but as soon as there's any seagrass out there, you have to either realign it or do some modifications under the current permitting requirements. Secondly, there's a 20-foot limitation on height. So that does pretty well restrict any large vessels that you may be fearful are going to be covered with boat shelters. And it's measured from the mean high water line, not from the vessel or from the surface of the dock. Another criteria that we're keeping, and this will be completely unaffected, is that we have riparian setback requirements. In most coastal zoning districts, that's going to be 10 or 15 feet from the side, which is actually more conservative than the state. The state requires 25 feet for open water areas, and I believe in canals they're reduced it to 10. If you're in an area where you would need to get closer than that, you have to obtain a waiver from the neighboring property that might be affected by that. So again, ours is tied to zoning criteria rather than do something like that, except for in cases of hardships. And then there's the dock extension limitation. So on open water, that doesn't really come into play because if you have 1,200 feet to the opposing side of the lagoon, you're not going to be able to get that much with the dock anyway. But in a canal system that's 75, 80 feet wide, you're looking at 20 feet or so. So there's a 25-foot limitation, or 25% of the waterway width, because there has to be navigable traffic with boats. So in looking at the proposed amendment, staff is of the impression that the size limitations that we're proposing with the 1 foot overhang will be consistent with the state's agency requirements and Army Corps. It allows us to still regulate the shelters in size, because we have those other provisions in place as well. So that's not appreciably changing in our opinion. Again, environmental impacts, because you can't locate over seagrass beds, you know, that's not really a concern that we see. And in fact, we have other provisions that allow for modifications to the dock or create incentives to relocate those areas away from even things like mangroves or you know, other coastal habitat that we want to preserve. And then lastly, it would remove these unintended consequences that were unforeseen when we went through this process last time from the 2019 amendments. So basically today, I just wanted to highlight the fact that there are some options at your disposal for reviewing this LDR amendment. One is to accept it as it is written, or rewritten, I should say. You could adopt modifications to staff's recommendation. I give an example here of explicitly adding the 2,000 square foot overall dock area limitation. I think, you know, that's a viable option if the board would prefer to go that route. And then lastly is to deny the proposed amendment. Staff's recommendation is to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that the language be adopted as it is proposed. And then that is my presentation. I have some other slides. I assume that there will be some questions, so maybe we can answer those now, unless the applicant would like to present some information.
Well, we'll open that public hearing after commissioners have a chance to ask you questions. So, commissioners, any questions?
How's this going to relate to any regulations that the municipalities may have?
So this would only affect the unincorporated county.
Right.
I mean, we do get involved sometimes with reviews of those other dock facilities as it relates to manatee protection, but this would not have a role in affecting those.
I was just thinking that if either the counties or the municipalities were more advantageous to the land or dock owner, that, you know, might be a consideration in annexation or something like that.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, this would really only affect the unincorporated county. And again, maybe this is a good time to show you one of the maps I created. So this is a map that shows and highlights what I would consider marginal docks. There is an area in the moorings. I think this was part of the discussion last time. So the overwhelming majority of the docks in the moorings are not actually marginal docks, because they do extend from the shoreline more than 10 feet, and they don't necessarily, I mean, they do run parallel typically to the seawall, but most of them extend out, at least because they have a building footprint they're allowed to do in their covenants. So if you look at the numbers of docks that are going to be of more concern, I would say, in those canal areas where, you know, you're limited in width, it's actually only like just over 300 that are actually being affected by that in these communities. And now this map does exclude, you know, undeveloped conservation lands, and so there's quite a few properties that weren't included in the total, if you will, but most of those are county lands or land trust properties, and they're not going to be developed or anything. So it's less than a third of the docks that we're discussing that would actually be close to shore, where, you know, a large structure could, you know, cause a visual problem, I guess.
Would you say this is more or less advantageous to the dock owner than any municipalities might be?
As in, if some of the municipalities have less restrictions?
Yeah, I mean, how do they compare, generally?
I briefly tried to find some regulations regarding boat shelters. I didn't really come across many, if any, because a lot of times the municipalities will kind of just defer to the state or the federal permitting requirements anyway. Ours is probably the most restrictive, I would say, among all the municipalities, I would think. But yeah, I think the other thing to highlight is that, again, especially in a canal or even on one of the open water sites, especially that 400 square feet is kind of like a key number in the sense that you don't realize that even a boat that's, let's say, about 25, 26 feet long, once you put a boat lift that's 12 feet with a 1 foot, if you're allowed 1 foot overhang, you're right at 400 square feet, and that's one vessel. So if you have any other vessels or a pair of jet skis or anything like that, you would be stopped right there on any of these on these highlighted subdivisions. So in that respect, it's not as fair, I guess you could say, as the open water sites where you're not meeting that same restriction.
Good?
Question, have you had any feedback, or have you spoken to any of the dock builders in the area as to their positions?
I have. I mean, I actually don't see a lot of covered boat shelters come across my desk, or haven't in the last few years or so. I suspect that's because a lot of folks are putting up the like the canvas T-tops that actually cover the boat slips, which should receive permits, but probably do not in many cases. So when you're talking about something that requires a lot of engineering and has to meet Florida building code, it's a much bigger investment, I would say. And so in that respect, they're going to want to maximize what they can build. And like I said, that's kind of creating an incentive to build more docks so you can build and get your money's worth and cover the most of your investment in your various boats.
And with your map, I don't see up on North A1A towards the inlet where there's a lot of those properties that are ocean to river. I mean, and they've got to go out a ways typically to get to any decent water. So
well, again, so this map was just highlighting areas that would be considered marginal docks.
okay.
Like I said, it's somewhere probably between 12 and 1,400 properties along the coast that would be considered traditional. So you can extend out more than just the 10 feet or so. They're not just hugging the shoreline or the seawall.
Okay.
Any other questions? So the proposal as written, the revised proposal as written, in some aspects is still more restrictive than state law. Right, didn't you, with the setbacks, isn't the proposal you're proposing here more restrictive?
So in that, yes and no. I mean, like I said, if it's fully compliant or consistent with the state regulations, then obviously there would be no difference. The only difference would be the setback requirements. And because we allow a reduced setback compared to theirs in most situations, of 15 feet instead of 25 feet, they could actually get closer to the property line under the county's code. So it's less restrictive.
I see, yeah.
Now, like I said, they have mechanisms in place to obtain waivers from the neighbors, and so do we. We usually don't see that for most docks. It's only for when you have like embayment areas where, you have pie-shaped lots and those riparian lines are coming to a point that you really have to go down that road. But most of the time, that's not the case. I think Chris actually has one he's working on right now. We were talking about it earlier, where they had to deviate because of shallow water, and they're getting a letter from the neighbor to authorize. So it's not like it happens in a vacuum and then all the neighbors,
Yeah.
you know, aren't aware of anything.
Okay. Anything else? Public hearing, I'll open it for public comment. Anyone who'd like to speak? Either one, state your name and address, please.
My name's Chris Penson. I'm owner of Indian River Docks. I live at 481 Avocado in Sebastian, Florida. What I've experienced and currently in the middle of, I have 5 individual projects that have already been permitted by the state and the federal government to allow for the size structure that they're requesting, but are in contention with the county due to the restriction. What we found with most of my customers that obviously have bought a substantial piece of property, they read the LDR and they say, well, I don't really need to go out to the maximum depth of water that we're allowed, which is 48 inches. Let's just say, for instance, that 48 inches on a non-marginal dock requires a 250-foot dock. They say, well, I don't want to spend that kind of money. I'm only going to have a boat that drafts 2 feet of water. I'm going to draw that back to save the money to non-impact. Well, we find an area that is shorter than the 48 inches of water. We terminate the boat dock there, and we build a structure. But the structure now, because we've reduced the size of the dock, does not allow them to add the structure that they need to cover their boat adequately. And let's face it, I mean, we deal with some pretty wealthy people that buy coastal property. They all don't want a 18-foot pontoon boat, which is pretty much 18 to 20 foot is what you're restricted to cover. And now they're building bigger boats that draw less water, and they want to be able to cover them and not have half of it stick out. One of the situations that I have is in an area that they're kind of forced into a marginal dock. It's open water, but they have a mangrove island that's across. We melt criteria, not exceeding the 25%. They can't go out any further because they meet the criteria of going out 48 inches. So basically their dock runs across their seawall. They wanted a 420 square foot boathouse to cover a 22-foot pontoon boat, which is all they aspire to have. The area is allowed to have a boathouse, but 400 square feet leaves them 20 square feet shy of actually being able to cover the entire boat. Their solution? Let's build more dock so I can meet that. We're trying to discourage and be stewards of our environment by not encouraging people to buy more dock that's going to impact the environment more. I mean, let's face it, 2,000 square foot dock is going to go up 500 feet, and that's not what you see on the shoreline. So most of my customers have wised up and said, well, we'll just add to the dock. We'll pay for the extra permitting, and that's something I'm trying to prevent. We don't want that. Again, the federal regulations and the Florida state statutes regulate fairly well. We are not allowed to terminate, as Mr. Hitt said, on seagrass affected areas. Therefore, if you're putting a boat on a boat lift and you're lifting it out of the water, which is a preferred method, they don't like the growth on the bottom of the boat or anti-foulant paint in the water. The biggest deterrent is not being able to protect that vessel that they're spending thousands of dollars on. So it's a very restrictive and a lot of unintended consequences. One other thing I wanted to say is that when we're talking municipalities and other areas, when I go to permitting, I have to pass HOA guidelines as well as county, state, feds, and sometimes some other neighborhood associations that have their input. Most all of them have their own private rules and regulations that govern. Some of them don't allow boat structures at all. Some of them are in areas where the HOA restricts the size. Some of the areas in Vero Beach and the canal systems don't allow them. So most of those are self-governed. This wouldn't even affect us anyway because they would not even, they're going into the neighborhood knowing I cannot have a boathouse. We're not even going to apply for it. So that's all I wanted to say. As a business in Indian River County that builds millions of dollars worth of docks, this is a severe restriction to our business.
So the revision proposed here is going to solve most of your problems?
Yes.
It's going to solve all of them?
Well, so far I haven't run into somebody that wants to lift a 50-foot motor yacht out of the water and cover it, because the water depths restrict that from happening. So basically, you have anywhere from a 10-foot jet ski all the way up to a 35 or 40-foot center console. And when they have outboard engines on them, they don't require a huge draft of motor. That's, these manufacturers have opened up a market across from tidal areas and inlets and said, look, these people want to get offshore and fish. We got to start building boats that are not of convertible type cruisers with inboard motors. We got to make them able to float and operate in shallower water. So they did, 3, 4 outboards. And those boats are longer, not that they draft anymore. So by natural aspects of the Florida state statute, that restricts anything that's going to draw 6 foot of water moving in, which if you get much bigger than that, then, so we haven't really run into a problem. This really does, and again, 1,000 square feet is big, but it does meet for, if you figure a 34 or 35 foot boat that has engines on it and a bow pulpit for an anchor, and then you have to have a 16-foot wide lift for that, you know, you meet it, as by the example Mr. Hitt had on Mr. Guitros's. 976 feet, he's happy. He did not have to move his boat lift or his dock further out into the water, which he would have been very able to do. That was on the table, that if he wasn't going to do it, we're just going to build the dock out further. So yes, it does solve a lot of issues.
Thanks for your clarification.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
David Cox, 9495 Periwinkle in Summer Place. And Mr. Pinson and I are partners. And I do a lot of dock permitting. And I can tell you that the state and federal regulations are more restrictive than the counties. And there are a couple of things that I should mention that Mr. Hitt did mention, that in these marginal situations where you have canals that are maybe 70 feet wide, it's 20%, according to the state, that you can extend from mean high water line or the seawall, only 20% of the width. And again, except at the seawall, if you have 48 inches of water right there, you're allowed to extend beyond that, but not in open water situations. 48 inches of water is the maximum depth that you can terminate at the waterward edge of your structure. And the state has a hard and fast 25-foot setback from the riparian lines, unlike the county. But as Mr. Hitt mentioned, you can get a letter from adjacent property owners to release you from that if they're good with it. And as Mr. Pinson mentioned, in some of these HOA settings, like the moorings, you just can't have a boat lift cover. So then it's a non-issue. The stringency of state and federal guidelines has increased over time. And it is now the case that if there's any SAV, if there's any submerged aquatic vegetation in your mooring area, you've got to figure out something else. You've got to move that mooring area. You're not going to be allowed to put a structure, a mooring structure, over submerged resources. So and that is a real concern we all have. I think, you know, we've seen the dramatic decrease in seagrass coverage, and we see it a lot. I do seagrass surveys all summer long, and I see what's going on, and it's not because of docks. I think I've probably said enough. Mr. Hitt did a fine job. If we have consistent, I will say one more thing about trying to explain the current regulations, county regulations to a client, forget it. I mean, they don't understand it. They don't know why. And we have problems in certain instances understanding how it's going to work. And staff has problems interpreting it as well. And I think that streamlining and clarifying it as in the proposed language will solve a lot of problems. And it isn't going to make the requirements less stringent at all. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to try to answer.
So you're in favor of the rewrite?
Oh, yes. Yes, very much so. Thank you
Good.
for your time.
Anyone else like to speak?
Good evening once again. I'm Joseph Paladin. I'm the chairman of the Land Use Committee of the RNA, and I'm also vice president of the executive board. And this isn't an answer to everything. It's not perfect by a long shot. But from what I've heard and what I see, we support staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? We'll close the public hearing. Any additional questions? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote, or call for a motion.
Makes sense to me. I'll make a motion to approve with staff's recommendations.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Commissioner matters. Any commissioner matters? None. I see with the planning matters that we have a request for a vote. The planning and staff request that Planning and Zoning Commission take a formal vote on starting all future meetings at 6 p.m.
And Mr. Chairman, Phil Mattson, Community Development Director. All is defined as all meetings effective December 8th. There has to be an implementation period before we could actually begin and do this.
So let me get this straight. I'm here for 12 years. They all start at 7 o'clock. I'm done, and they're going to start at 6.
We waited for that moment.
Well played. So we'll vote on that?
Please.
Yep, call for a vote on starting at 6, or a motion to approve that? Or just a vote? Is it just a vote?
Someone
gotta
could make
Make a motion and vote on it. That's what
Yeah, make a motion.
Second it.
Anyone?
I'll make a motion that we start all future meetings at 6 p.m. effective December 8th.
And a second?
I'll second for discussion. Are there any pluses and minuses to this?
Oh, absolutely. So what time is kickoff tonight?
You got
8
home?
o'clock, yeah, perfect.
Let's get real here. The 6 p.m. time, it gets darker in the winter, and I mean, it's really going to help our population, which is a little older. They have a little trepidation. Some people of leaving home in the evening. I think this will encourage more public input at 6 o'clock. I really do, in this county. There might be other places where, you know, the get-home work from late and shower crowd would rather have 7, not too many. And quite honestly, we've had long meetings in the past. We've had meetings that haven't wrapped up till 11 o'clock. I've been to a few. This will probably take some time off of that burden on you guys who don't get paid for this unless I'm mistaken.
Well, it is dark at 6 o'clock, a lot of the, you know, in the fall and winter.
Yeah, well, you know,
Does this provide staff?
starts getting dark at 7 o'clock in October and 8 o'clock and so forth, so it's progressive.
Does this provide staff enough time between the end of the regular workday and preparing for this meeting?
I could say staff would prefer this. There are some staff members who live, you know, southern Brevard County, some in St. Lucie. I think they'd prefer it. They don't really have time to kind of go home and come back, so.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 6 it is,
We appreciate it, thank you.
starting the 8th of December.
Yes.
Attorney matters? None, sir. Excellent. This meeting is adjourned.